Live look outside the federal courthouse as we are awaiting potential reaction from prosecutors, defense attorneys, and even perhaps Hunter Biden himself. We do know that as the verdict was being read, he stared straight ahead, showing very little emotion. The judge has now excused jurors. We do want to bring in attorney Jeremy Rosenthal to break all of this down. Jeremy, we have learned that the jury has found Hunter Biden guilty on all 3 felony charges, really only deliberating for about 3 hours. What is your reaction?
Not surprised in the least. Hunter Biden was prepared to not necessarily plead guilty to this, but accept responsibility in exchange for the tax deal that was bounced by the judge a while ago. Every once in a while, you have to try a case just because. That was the situation here. The evidence was pretty overwhelming. Hunter Biden and his team gave it their best shot. The jury, it sounds like they deliberated a little bit. This is about what I think most folks would have expected here.
So what happens next? Again, Hunter Biden is a first-time offender. He faces a maximum of 25 years in prison, but first-time offenders do not often see the maximum.
What's going to happen at this point is the court's going to do what's called a pre-sentence investigation. The federal government goes by what's called the federal sentencing guidelines. So the statute provides a penalty that's up to 25 years. However, the guidelines are not mandatory, but it's a big matrix is what it is. And you score points by having a criminal history. You score points based on the type of offense there was. You score other points in certain instances if you were an organizer of a conspiracy. He's not going to score very high really on any of these. So in this instance, the pre-sentence investigation is going to tell the judge what the guideline ranges are, and in all likelihood, the judge follows those. I would be surprised if it's any more than 18 months at most. It's even possible he could get federal probation here.
And that's what I was going to ask you is, will he actually see the inside of a prison, or would it be more likely that he were to serve house arrest?
Federal probation is rare, and federal house arrest is, I think, going to at best be a case-by-case basis. I think that's doubtful too. You might see that in state court of New York, for instance. Michael Cohen was given house arrest. Donald Trump, one of the things on the table for him is potentially house arrest. But federal in the feds, probation is fairly rare. Again, I'm anticipating a punishment 6 months, maybe 12, at most 18 months. Now, one caveat for Hunter Biden is that because now he's got a criminal history and he still has that federal tax charge to pay, where he again was expected to plead guilty to it. So I think the evidence in that case is going to be pretty difficult against him. His guideline range for that offense is going to be bumped up just slightly. So now he's looking at more time on that tax charge.
So let's say the judge actually does sentence him to prison time. Where might he serve?
That's anybody's guess. The federal government sentences you where you fit most. I mean, they do assessments based on what type of offender you are, what type of crime you are. Are you a gang member? They do all those types of calculations, and then they find the best place. Given that this is, it'll be interesting to see if they classify this more as a weapons offense as compared to a drug offense, because drug offenders probably going to get treated a little differently, you would think, than a violent offender. That said, I do think that the idea of club fed is kind of a bit of a myth these days. The federal pen sucks. Just ask Martha Stewart or anybody who's been there. There's no really good federal institution to be incarcerated in.
And also on that front, Hunter Biden is not any ordinary citizen. He is the son of the current president of the United States. Does that play a role in where he is assigned and how he is assigned? You know, he does have a very high profile. Could he be a target? All of these questions. What happens? Again, this is historic. This has never happened before. So what are the conversations being had right now, and how could that impact what happens?
That's a really good question. When you have an offender who has got a profile like this, or needs a little more protection than another inmate, that can certainly impact their placement. So those are certainly things that I think the government is taking into consideration. Jails and prisons get sued very regularly, very frequently. The vast majority of those lawsuits are meritless, but some of them are pretty good. And prison's a dangerous place. I believe, I'm going to quote Mother Teresa, and I read this on the internet, so I know what she said is true. You can judge a society by how they treat their inmates and how they treat their prisoners. In the United States, it's no fun to be a prisoner. Prison is difficult on every level. That said, we're better than any place in the world. Lawsuits that get brought against jails.
Jeremy, I do want to pause right here. I want to show folks right here, and I did want to share this with you. As you can see, First Lady Jill Biden leaving the courtroom right there. It's a little hard to see, but we did see her walking out of the courtroom right there and into this SUV. Again, that is the first time that we've seen First Lady Jill Biden. We did not see President Biden, but I did want to share this live look outside the Wilmington, Delaware federal courthouse as we saw First Lady Jill Biden getting into that SUV after hearing that Hunter Biden has been convicted on all 3 felony charges. So I did want to share that with our viewers as we continue to follow this breaking news. We are still awaiting reaction from this, but I did want to get back before I interrupted you, Jeremy, on your thoughts, because this is a historic moment on the heels of another historic moment with former President Donald Trump. A lot of these conversations perhaps have never even been had before in terms of what do you do with the son of a sitting president after he's convicted on felony charges? How do you protect him? What does that look like? I'm sure this is a lot that the judge is now going to have to mull over as they consider that sentence.
A lot. You're exactly right. I mean, we're sort of in uncharted waters. And again, our prison systems, they're not perfect, but they're really held accountable on a very frequent basis. Vast majority of lawsuits are meritless, but the ones that have legs really change the way that prisons operate for the better. And if this offender needs additional protection, they're going to make sure that he gets that. They don't want an incident. They don't want to be in the news. So I think that those are all things that might be taken into consideration, and potentially consideration for the judge for sentencing. If the judge is on the borderline between a 6-month sentence and do we put this guy on federal probation, maybe that makes him lean towards federal probation. Certainly, there's a good argument by Hunter Biden and his team that, look, prison doesn't make you better. It makes you angrier. If you've got a drug or alcohol issue, then you really want the government testing this guy on a regular basis, using some of their resources for the addiction. And we see a lot more of that, definitely in the last decade, of resources getting pushed towards treating addiction, treating recidivism that way. Because I think we all sort of see that addiction is a disease that sort of predicates a lot of these things.
We're taking a live look outside the federal courthouse here in Wilmington, Delaware. We did see that a podium was set up with microphones. We're waiting for responses. This would be the first time that we hear from anyone, especially because this is a federal courthouse. No electronic devices or cameras are allowed inside. When we're waiting for the response, do you think Hunter Biden will speak? And if so, you know, what might he say as he's been convicted?
I doubt it. He didn't testify in his trial. I think at this point with this judge, I think if he gets up and talks, if I'm his lawyer, I'm telling him, look, unless you are going to completely respect the process, completely respect this jury's verdict, and unless you are just going to talk about and apologize to anybody and everybody in your family, just don't talk at all, because you're going to do nothing but hurt yourself. Because this judge can take those types of things into account. A federal inmate or a federal person, a federal convict, if you will, has the opportunity in court to do what's called an allocution. That's to talk to the judge before sentencing. And again, in a lot of those instances, the person just hurts themselves. So given that he didn't testify in the trial, I don't think we're going to hear from him today, especially because we just have more out there for the guy, right? We've got this tax issue, and now he's really facing higher punishment on that case. So I'm sure his lawyers are really aware of that.
So going back to what happens now in regards to the timeline, the judge will now decide what that sentence is. For our folks out there who may not be as familiar with the nuances of the legal system, is Hunter Biden, will he remain a free individual until that sentencing? When might that sentencing happen? What does that all look like? Can you just break that down for us?
Right. The pre-sentence investigation is essentially outpatient. I don't believe he will be taken into custody. It doesn't sound like he is. He's usually free to go. He was given pretrial release already. That is extended for him to complete the pre-sentence investigation. He's going to have to meet with the federal probation officers who basically do that. What's going to happen there is we're going to have a sentencing that's probably about 90 days out. Once that sentence is handed down, he's going to be given a report date. And then that's when his sentence would start. Doing the quick math, that could put him into federal custody probably around the time of the election, or it could be before, it could be after. We'll certainly know his sentence before November.
Are there any restrictions as he awaits the sentencing? Is he free to travel anywhere he wants and do anything he wants? Not breaking the law, of course, but under the law, what does that look like?
He's got to say "Mother, may I" for the vast majority of things. It's going to be the same rules that were in place beforehand. If he wants to go travel, again, depending on where that is, he's going to have to get permission for it. He's going to have to do regular check-ins. They're going to have to know where he is on a regular basis. So it's pretty tightly monitored, as you would expect it to be. But it's just sort of more the same. And this is kind of, in essence, your reward, if you will, for having good behavior prior to trial. Is the judge gives you a little bit of leeway, a little bit of leash after the trial as well. So, and look, if he does something dumb, he does something stupid, if he uses again, then, I mean, he's just making his own problems worse at this point. So you're sort of on your recognizance. And on a serious note, people who suffer from addiction, legal problems are not their friends. Stresses, triggers, things like that cause people to use. So this is certainly a test for anybody's sobriety. And the downside for the court is that if you do extend leash like this to somebody, a lot of times they will abuse it, especially if they're an addict, especially if they can't handle the pressure of, okay, great, now we're going to go to prison here in a few months. A lot of times they'll reoffend and get themselves into even more trouble.
So when might we hear the judge handing down that sentencing date? Are we expecting that later on today, later on this week? What might that look like?
That's right. We might get it as soon as today. It may be a function of the pre-sentence investigation. Those folks may want to look into certain areas. They'll interview Hunter Biden. They'll also take into account, they'll probably talk to the law enforcement who were involved in this case, maybe some family members. They want to get it right. So, and then they issue a report that the defendant can take exception with. And then it gets kicked around like a bit of a football, but the judge can set that date really any time. But again, typically that's going to be about 90 days down the road from now.
So, Jeremy, we continue to follow this breaking news as the jury has found Hunter Biden guilty on all 3 felony charges. As we continue to learn more, we haven't heard from anyone yet. We're still waiting to hear if anyone is going to speak. But anything else that really stands out to you? Because, again, only 3 hours of deliberation before coming down with this verdict. Anything that stands out to you in regards to this trial, or from your legal standpoint and your expertise, this was fairly cut and dry?
I think it was fairly cut and dry. I was speaking this morning to Jeanne Francine on LiveNOW, and I told her I thought it would be, I think it was 9:15 or 10:15 Eastern time that we'd get a verdict. I thought it would be this morning. Look, when you have such a long trial over something so small and so distinct, a long time, big controversy here when there's really not. So this is not surprising. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution, I thought, did an appropriate job of getting the right amount of persuasion in the case. They did what they needed to do.
All right, Jeremy Rosenthal, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox as we continue our breaking news coverage as a jury has now reached a verdict finding Hunter Biden guilty on all 3 felony charges. We appreciate you for taking the time to join us.